Namaste, welcome to tummy.com, a platform for yoga teachers and teachers in training. This is the second part of Hanumanasana where we will discuss a set of sitting asanas. As I mentioned, we have divided the sequence into three parts. But why did we do so? We started with warm-ups like Sun Salutation B for activating the muscles in different parts of the body, which was followed by a set of standing asanas. These standing asanas are a great foundational start for intermediate poses like Hanumanasana. This video we will talk about sitting poses, which will not only work on stretching the hips, inner thighs, but at the same time bring the connect between the legs and the ground, just like in Hanumanasana. So let us begin. The first pose is Heron pose or Kronchasana. It helps in stretching the hamstrings, hips, quadriceps and works on boosting the energy which is needed for a peak pose like Hanumanasana. Downward facing dog, as in the next, is introduced again as it's a base pose and can be used in flow yoga sequences frequently. Moving on to the next one, which is the bound angle pose or Baddha Konasana, which is a very good pose for stretching the pelvic region, hips and the hamstrings. This pose creates a strong base for the spine, putting pressure on the hips, which will help the students while doing Hanumanasana, because even in Hanumanasana, a strong base is required. The next pose is the seated side stretch pose. Here, as you see, the stretch is felt in the hips, hamstrings, pelvic region and the quadriceps. This will give an intense stretch in those areas, and hence some variations that can be introduced by the teacher based upon the flexibility of the students. Variations are done so as to keep the students engaged in the practice and not to lose the motivation. So if you click on this particular pose, you will be able to view the various variations of this pose. So as you see, these are the variations of the seated side stretch, one of which is seated straddle pose. So depending upon the flexibility and capability, you decide which variation you would like to include in the flow. Let's move on to the next pose, that is the seated straddle pose variation, which is a variation of the seated side stretch. Here, greater the stretch felt in the hamstrings, greater the support it will give to the student's spine and hips while doing Hanumanasana. So now let's move on to the next one, which is the seated torso circles or Kundalini circles. This is a simple pose that focuses on the clockwise and anti-clockwise movement of the torso. But how will this help the student in the peak pose? The objective here is to activate the energies in the base of the spine or the Muladhara chakra, which is in action while doing Hanumanasana, and by activating it, students are able to create a balance between their mind and their body. It's an energy awakener that will only get the best out of the practice of the peak pose. Moving on to the next one, which is the bound angle forward bend. The stretch is felt in the lower spine, the hips and the pelvic region, and this will strengthen these areas for Hanumanasana. The next pose is the shooting bow pose, which works on the hamstrings, the hips. Besides increasing the hip flexibility of the student, the added benefit is that the student is balancing on the base. This is the exact balance which is required even in Hanumanasana. Teachers can refer the variations and add them to their flow based on the capabilities of the students, making it easier for them or pushing their limits. So if you click on this pose, you will be able to view the variations. These are the variations. So depending upon the capacity of the student, you can make it easy or you can make it even more tough, just pushing their limits. We'll go on to the next pose, which is an intense variation of the shooting bow pose itself, that is the compass pose or Surya Yantrasana. It is a variation of the shooting bow pose, so it works on the same regions as the shooting bow pose and also works on balance. Here the students will develop an awareness towards their body, and if they are able to do this pose, their energy levels and confidence to be able to do Hanumanasana is higher. Hence, understanding that poses greatly impact the motivation levels of the student is very important. Now, the last seated pose is the garland or Malasana, which is a very basic pose but works on the Muladhara chakra or the root chakra, hips, pelvic region, hamstrings and the lower back of the students all at once, which is a great way to end the set of seated asanas. Now in this video, besides covering asanas that work on the hips, hamstrings, pelvic region, we have introduced two new concepts, that is balancing on the base and awakening of root chakra or Muladhara chakra. which are eminent aspects of Hanumanasana. The last video we will talk about supine position asanas, the peak pose and cool down asanas. So stay tuned and thank you.